Gospel of Genesis, chapter 50.
There are pains that enter our lives without asking permission. There are betrayals that do not come from distant enemies, but from people who knew our story, our voice, our heart, and even our dreams. There are prisons that have no visible bars, yet they imprison the soul in silent questions. Why did this happen to me? Why did God allow it? Why was I wounded precisely when I was trying to do what was right? The story of Joseph of Egypt begins like this. In the delicate ground of dreams and wounds, it does not begin in a palace, though it ends before kings. It does not begin with honor, though it ends with exaltation. It does not begin with answers, though it ends by revealing a purpose that was hidden behind every tear. Joseph's story begins inside a family marked by favoritism, jealousy, conflict, and pain. And that is exactly why it looks so much like the lives of many of us. Joseph was the son of Jacob, also called Israel. He was loved by his father in a special way, and that love, too visible in the eyes of his brothers, awakened in them a bitter mixture of envy and rejection. The Bible shows us that Jacob made Joseph a special coat, a garment that symbolized favor, distinction, and honor. But what seemed to Joseph to be only the affection of a father became, to his brothers, a constant reminder that he was treated differently. And then came the dreams. Joseph dreamed that his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowed down before his sheaf. Then he dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down before him. He was still young, perhaps not mature enough to understand the weight of what he carried, but there was something of God in those dreams. There was a promise hidden there. There was a destiny being announced before he even had the strength to endure the road toward that destiny, and his brothers could not bear to hear it. Perhaps one of them said in his heart, "So you think you will be greater than us?" Another, with eyes full of anger, may have murmured, "We will see what becomes of those dreams." And there, in the poisonous silence of envy, a plot began that would change Joseph's life forever. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to see how his brothers were doing in the fields. Joseph obeyed. He did not go out to confront them. He did not go out to provoke them. He did not go out to exalt himself. He went because his father sent him. And many times, this is how it happens to us. We are simply trying to fulfill a simple mission, trying to obey, trying to do what is right. And suddenly we find ourselves before people who have already decided to hurt us before we even say a word. When Joseph's brothers saw him from afar, they recognized his coat. Before they saw his face, they saw the symbol of favor. Before they heard his voice, they remembered the dreams, and they said among themselves, "Here comes the dreamer." What a heavy sentence. They did not call him by name. They did not say, "Here comes our brother." They called him by what they hated most about him, the dreamer. And they decided to kill him. But God was already working even in the middle of that cruelty. Reuben tried to stop them from killing him. Judah suggested selling him. And Joseph, that young man who had left home wearing a coat of honor, ended up being thrown into an empty cistern, without water, without defense, without understanding. Imagine for a moment the heart of that young man. The open sky above him, the cold walls around him, the sound of his brothers talking outside. Perhaps he cried out, "Please do not do this to me. I am Joseph, I am your brother." But envy hardens the soul so much that it can hear weeping and still negotiate a price. Joseph was sold as a slave. The coat was stained with animal blood and taken to Jacob so that the father would believe his son was dead. While Jacob mourned the death of a living son, Joseph was being taken through the desert toward Egypt, moving farther away from everything he knew. His home was left behind, his father was left behind, his childhood was left behind, his dreams seemed to have been left behind. But the dreams of God do not die when men sell us. Perhaps you need to hear this today. What God has placed over your life cannot be cancelled by the wickedness of those who did not understand your calling. Envy may try to push you into a cistern. Betrayal may try to sell you for coins. Lies may try to stain your coat. But when God is writing the story, even the road of pain can become a path toward purpose. Joseph arrived in Egypt as a slave and was bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. To human eyes, it seemed like the end. The beloved son was now a servant in a foreign land. The young man of dreams now obeyed orders in a house that was not his own. But Scripture reveals something powerful. The Lord was with Joseph. That sentence changes everything. The Lord was with Joseph in Jacob's house, but he was also with Joseph in Potiphar's house. The Lord was with Joseph when he wore the coat, but he was also with Joseph when the coat was taken from him. The Lord was with Joseph when he dreamed, but he was also with Joseph when no one else believed in his dreams. And because the Lord was with Joseph, everything he did prospered. Potiphar noticed that there was something different about that young man. He saw faithfulness, excellence, wisdom, a presence that did not come only from human effort. So he placed Joseph over all his house. From slave, Joseph became administrator. From sold, he became trusted. From humiliated, he became an instrument of order and prosperity. But Joseph's faithfulness would still be tested. Potiphar's wife began to desire Joseph and tried to seduce him. Day after day, she insisted that he lie with her. But Joseph refused. He understood that his life was not guided merely by opportunities, but by the fear of God. He said, in essence, how could I commit such wickedness and sin against God? Joseph was far from his father, far from his family, far from anyone who could watch over his conduct, but he was not far from God. This is one of the greatest marks of a faithful heart. True integrity appears when no one is watching except the Lord. Joseph ran from temptation, but he was unjustly accused. Potiphar's wife held onto his garment and turned his purity into a lie. The one who had refused sin was treated as guilty. The one who chose to honor God was thrown into prison. And here is one of the hardest parts of the walk of faith. Doing what is right does not always immediately spare us from pain. Sometimes doing what is right takes us to places where we would not want to be. Sometimes obedience does not open the door at that very moment. Sometimes it walks with us inside the cell. But once again, the Bible says, the Lord was with Joseph, not only in the field, not only in Potiphar's house, now also in prison. The presence of God does not depend on the scenery. It is not cancelled by injustice. It does not abandon the righteous at the bottom of the cistern, nor does it move away from the innocent in the dark cell. God was with Joseph when he was betrayed. God was with Joseph when he was sold. God was with Joseph when he was tempted. God was with Joseph when he was slandered. And God was with Joseph when he seemed forgotten. In prison, Joseph did not stop serving. This is profound. He could have become bitter. He could have said, I will not help anyone anymore. I was good, and they only hurt me. I was faithful, and I only lost. But Joseph continued to be useful in the hands of God. He served the prison keeper. He cared for the other prisoners. He interpreted dreams. He noticed the sadness on the faces of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Imagine Joseph looking at those men and asking, why do you look so troubled today? What an impressive thing. A wounded man still noticed the pain of others. An imprisoned man still cared about those who were also imprisoned. A man who had every reason to shut down still chose to be an instrument of God. The cupbearer and the baker had dreams, and Joseph, recognizing that interpretation belonged to God, explained their meaning. The baker would be condemned. The cupbearer would be restored to his position. Then Joseph asked the cupbearer, when you stand before Pharaoh, remember me. Speak about me, because I was taken unjustly from my land, and I have done nothing to be in this prison. Joseph asked only to be remembered. He did not ask for riches. He did not ask for revenge. He asked that someone would remember him. 2 years is a long time for someone waiting for a door to open. 2 years is a long time for someone who has already suffered too much. 2 years is a long time for someone who helped another person and watched that person move on without looking back. Perhaps Joseph woke up many mornings expecting to be called. Perhaps he heard footsteps in the corridor and thought, "Now they have come to get me." But the footsteps passed by. The door did not open. The silence remained, and even so God had not forgotten him. There are human forgettings that cannot stop divine remembrance. The cupbearer forgot Joseph, but God did not. His brothers tried to erase Joseph from the family, but God did not erase Joseph from the purpose. Potiphar believed the lie, but God knew the truth. The prison held Joseph's body, but it could not imprison God's plan. Then, at the right time, Pharaoh had dreams. Strange dreams, disturbing dreams, dreams that troubled his spirit. He saw fat cows being devoured by thin cows. He saw full ears of grain being swallowed by withered ears. None of the wise men of Egypt could interpret them. And in that moment, what had seemed like forgetfulness began to turn into remembrance. The cupbearer finally said, "Today I remember my faults. There was a young Hebrew in prison who interpreted our dreams. Joseph was called in haste." Imagine that scene, the prisoner being taken out of the cell, his hair being cut, his clothes being changed, the forgotten man being led before the most powerful man in Egypt. In one day, Joseph left the prison and entered the palace. In one day, God turned the page. In one day, the door that no one could open was opened by the hand of the Most High. Pharaoh said, "I have heard that you can interpret dreams." And Joseph answered with humility, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Joseph did not use that moment to promote himself. He did not say, "Finally they recognized my talent." He pointed to God, because whoever passes through the cistern, the house of servitude, and the prison without losing faith, learns that all glory belongs to the Lord. Joseph interpreted the dreams. 7 years of abundance would come upon Egypt, and afterward 7 years of famine. A wise man had to be chosen to manage the resources, store up food, and prepare the nation. Pharaoh saw in Joseph the Spirit of God, wisdom and discernment. So he placed him as governor of Egypt. The slave became an authority. The prisoner became the administrator of a nation's survival. The forgotten one became the answer to a crisis. But the story had not yet reached its deepest point. The famine reached many lands, including Jacob's house. Joseph's brothers, the same ones who had sold him, went to Egypt in search of food. They did not know that the governor before them was the brother they had betrayed. They bowed down before him, exactly as in the dreams of his youth. Imagine Joseph's heart in that moment. The faces of the past were before him. The voices that had called him a dreamer were now asking for bread. The hands that sold him were now stretched out in need. He could have taken revenge. He could have ordered them to be imprisoned. He could have said, "Now you will know what suffering is." But God had done such a deep work in Joseph that he was no longer ruled by the wound. That does not mean Joseph did not cry. He cried many times. The Bible shows Joseph stepping away to weep. Because forgiveness is not pretending it did not hurt. Healing is not denying the wound. Purpose is not erasing the memory of suffering. Joseph cried because the pain was real. He cried because the betrayal was real. He cried because years had been torn away from his life, but his tears were no longer prisons. They had become rivers of healing. After revealing his identity to his brothers, Joseph said something that crosses the centuries and reaches our hearts like a flame of hope. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about what is seen today, to preserve many people alive." Genesis 50:20 is one of the most powerful declarations of biblical faith. Joseph did not say that evil did not exist. He did not minimize his brother's guilt. He did not call betrayal a blessing. He said, "You meant evil against me." In other words, he recognized the wickedness, the intention, the injustice, but he did not stop there. He completed the sentence, "But God meant it for good." This is the great difference between human vision and spiritual vision. Human vision looks at broken pieces and says, "It is over." Spiritual vision looks at those same pieces and says, God can still build something. Human vision looks at the cistern and sees abandonment. God looks at the cistern and sees the beginning of a path. Human vision looks at the prison and sees forgetfulness. God looks at the prison and sees training. Human vision looks at betrayal and sees destruction. God looks at betrayal and, without approving sin, transforms even that into a road toward a greater purpose. God is not the author of human wickedness, but he is Lord over history. He does not rejoice in betrayal, injustice, lies, or pain. But he has the power to enter the scene that evil tried to dominate and write a final word that belongs only to him. Maybe today you are living through the season of the cistern. You look up and see only a small opening of light. You wonder why people who should have protected you wounded you. You feel as if you were thrown into a place where no one hears your cry. But remember, Joseph, the cistern was not the end. Maybe you are living through the season of Potiphar's house. You are working, serving, trying to be faithful, but you still feel far from the promise. It seems your life is producing for others while your own dreams remain distant. But remember, God was also with Joseph there. Maybe you are living through the season of prison. You did what was right and still were misunderstood. You chose the truth and still were accused. You remained faithful and still the door closed. But remember, the prison could not stop the purpose. Or maybe you are in the time of silence, waiting for someone to remember you, waiting for an opportunity to come, waiting for God to move the circumstances. And each day seems the same as the one before, but Joseph's God works even when nothing seems to be happening. God's silence is not absence. Sometimes it is preparation, sometimes it is alignment, sometimes it is heaven arranging encounters you cannot yet see. Joseph teaches that God's purpose is not destroyed by difficult environments. He flourished as a slave. He served as a prisoner. He governed as a healed man. And when he had the power to take revenge, he chose to preserve lives. This shows that true purpose is not only reaching the palace, it is reaching the palace without losing your soul. Many people want exaltation, but they do not want the treatment. They want the table before Pharaoh, but they do not want to learn faithfulness in anonymity. They want authority, but they do not want to go through the process that purifies the heart. Joseph was not only promoted by God, he was prepared by God. And preparation almost always happens in places we would not choose. The boy who told dreams had to become the man who interpreted dreams to save lives. The young man who received a coat from his father had to lose the coat in order to discover that his true identity was not in the garment, but in the presence of God. The beloved Son had to pass through rejection in order to learn that the love of the Heavenly Father is not lost when human love fails. And here there is a deep lesson for us. God does not waste pain surrendered to him. Pain without God can become bitterness. Betrayal without God can become revenge. Injustice without God can become an inner prison. But when we surrender everything to the Lord, he begins to transform what wounded us into testimony, what broke us into compassion, what humbled us into maturity, what made us cry into a source of comfort for others. Joseph did not save only Egypt. He saved his own family. He preserved the lineage through which many centuries later the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would come. This means that the purpose hidden in Joseph's pain was greater than he could imagine. While Joseph was thinking only about getting out of prison, God was thinking about preserving a promise. While Joseph wanted to be remembered by the cupbearer, God was preparing the moment when he would be remembered before Pharaoh. While his brothers wanted to end his dreams, God was using the story to protect generations. And so, it can also happen with us. God does not always explain everything in the beginning. Joseph did not receive a map at the bottom of the cistern. He did not hear a voice saying, "Calm down, one day you will be governor." He had to walk by faith. He had to obey without understanding. He had to serve without applause. He had to wait without visible guarantees. Faith matures when we learn to trust the character of God, even when we do not understand the ways of God. Perhaps you are looking at your life today and seeing only losses, a broken relationship, a friendship that betrayed your trust, a professional door that closed, an injustice that stained your name, a season of loneliness, silence, and waiting. But Joseph's story rises like a voice from God saying, "I can still transform this. I can still use this. I can still bring life from where they tried to sow death." And at this point, we need to understand something. When God turns evil into good, he does not only change circumstances, he transforms the heart. The greatest miracle in Joseph was not leaving prison. It was leaving prison without becoming a prisoner of bitterness. The greatest miracle was not governing Egypt. It was governing himself when his brothers stood before him. The greatest miracle was not having power. It was using power to feed those who had once wounded him. This is the work of God. Only God can make someone look at those who betrayed him and say, "Do not be afraid." Only God can transform tears into forgiveness. Only God can remove poison from the soul without denying the reality of the wound. Only God can make a victim into an instrument of salvation. And when we look at Joseph, we are also led to look at Christ, because Jesus, in an even deeper way, was also rejected by his own. He was also sold for coins. He was also falsely accused. He was also handed over to authorities. He also suffered without deserving it. He was also taken away as an innocent man. But what men planned as death, God transformed into salvation. On the cross, evil seemed to have won. But on the third day, God revealed that even the cross could become the path of redemption. Joseph points to this greater truth. God specializes in turning tombs into beginnings, crosses into victory, tears into testimony, losses into purpose. Therefore, do not surrender your soul to bitterness. Do not allow someone's betrayal to determine who you will become. Do not let a painful season define your entire story. Your life is not in the hands of the one who rejected you. Your life is in the hands of the God who saw Joseph in the cistern, walked with Joseph in Egypt, sustained Joseph in prison, and exalted Joseph at the right time. The same God sees you. He saw the tear you swallowed so no one would notice. He saw the night when you wondered whether it was still worth continuing. He saw when you were faithful and no one recognized it. He saw when you helped people who later forgot your name. He saw when you chose what was right and still suffered unfair consequences. And he did not only see it, he kept it. He is working. There is a moment when God calls Joseph out of prison. There is a moment when the clothes change. There is a moment when shame gives way to honor. There is a moment when the story begins to make sense. But before that moment arrives, God forms within us a faith that does not depend on applause, a hope that does not die in silence, and a heart that keeps serving even while wounded. And when that moment comes, may you be able to say, like Joseph, "The evil was real, but God was greater. The wound was deep, but grace was even deeper. They tried to destroy me, but God sustained me. They sold me, but God led me. They forgot me, but God remembered me. They meant evil, but God meant it for good." This is the message of Genesis 50:20. It is not an empty promise that nothing difficult will ever happen. It is an eternal truth that no difficulty is too great for the God who governs history. Betrayal does not have the final word. Prison does not have the final word. Lies do not have the final word. Loss does not have the final word. The final word belongs to the Lord. So lift your eyes. Perhaps you are still in the middle of the process, but God already sees the purpose. Perhaps you are still crying, but God is already preparing comfort. Perhaps you are still waiting, but God is already arranging the right encounter, the right door, the right time, the right answer. Remain faithful. Remain upright. Keep serving. Keep believing. Because the God who transformed Joseph's cistern into a road to the palace can also transform your pain into testimony. The God who transformed betrayal into the salvation of many lives can also transform what they tried to use against you into an instrument of healing for others. The God who made Joseph forgive and feed his brothers can also heal your heart from all bitterness and make you a source of life. In the end, Joseph was not only saying something about his brothers, he was declaring something about God. He was saying, "You had a plan, but God had another. You acted with wickedness, but God acted with sovereignty. You saw my end, but God saw my purpose." May this truth enter deeply into your heart. What wounded you does not have to destroy you. What delayed you does not have to stop you. What they did against you is not greater than what God can do in you and through you. Surrender your cisterns to the Lord. Surrender your prisons to the Lord. Surrender your tears to the Lord. Surrender the names, the memories, the injustices, the questions and the silences, and ask God not only to change your story, but to heal your heart while the story is still being written. Because one day, by the grace of God, you will look back and perhaps still see scars, but you will not see only pain. You will see deliverance. You will see growth. You will see maturity. You will see purpose. You will see that God was stitching together something you did not understand. You will see that He never abandoned you, and then your soul will be able to say, "It was hard, but God was with me. It hurt, but God sustained me. I cried, but God transformed it. They meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." If this message spoke to your heart, leave your like so that more people may be reached by the Word of God. Share in the comments what touched you most in this reflection and how this teaching can transform your walk with Christ. And subscribe to Daily Walk with Jesus to continue receiving biblical reflections, inspiring teachings, and messages that strengthen faith every day. May God bless your life and your family.